I'll be honest, I might sound calm and quiet in these videos, but occasionally, inside my brain, I am host to a very demanding stationery gremlin. You know the one. It whispers, a new brass pen will really make you a better writer, you know. Or, that stack of limited edition traveler's notebooks is a real sound investment. But last year, me and my stationery gremlin had to have a serious chat. I looked at my shelves, drawers full of unused goods, and realized I'd built a beautiful doom box of things that I was too afraid to use. I had stacks of gorgeous inserts and pens collecting dust, but every time I looked at them, I didn't feel inspired. I just felt stressed. The clutter was actually crowding out the calm I was trying to find. Then it hit me. I realized that if I stopped buying beautiful things, especially beautiful things that stayed unused, I could afford to go out and make beautiful memories instead. This is how I'm putting my stationery gremlin on a budget, or better yet, on a leash, to fund all the adventures that I can fit into this lifetime. So I may have done a little warming up in the last quarter of 2025 because this realization came after my trip in late November and early December. I decided to make 2026 the year where I trade transaction for transformation. I decided that the dopamine hit of a checkout screen could not compete with the smell of the sea air on the Shimanami Kaido, or the gorgeous sunset at Kurashiki, or even just the silence of a Kyoto tea house. So, now that we're back at the desk, I started mapping out the rules of our truce. I needed a system that prioritizes using over owning, especially this year, because apart from travel adventures, I'm also undertaking a huge further education adventure, which I'll talk more about in future videos. But for now, let's take a look at the rules and sciencey bits on planning a low-buy year, especially if you're taking care of your own stationery gremlin. Most low-buy challenges start with a bank statement, but mine started with a doom box, a pen, and a paper. I realized that having stacks of unused paper and pens was not making me more creative. It created such negative energy around all of the things I accumulated and pressured me to using them that made me counterintuitively not want to use them at all. That, plus the fact that I had limited space and most of them were kept away and not visible or inviting to use, meant that they stayed that way, unused. Whenever I would see them and I didn't have the time, energy, or the ready supplies at hand to use them, I would just feel frustrated that such beautiful things would sit dormant like that. So first, I started with my whys. I listed down number 1, the simplest reason that I was already feeling. I didn't want to feel like I had accumulated and was wasteful. This may be a different sensation for you, but I think starting with a why, especially one that you can already readily feel, is the first step towards real lasting transformation. My next why was because I'm preparing for further education. So I listed out the cost of the different courses and graduate certificates that I'm preparing to undertake this year. I want to fund this journey with as little debt as possible, and that requires a level of discipline that the stationary gremlin of last year in my brain does not exactly like. I really need to stop getting my dopamine from transactions and start getting it from transformation, using my supplies, learning, managing my emotions, reflecting on myself and how I can improve to learn, grow, and document my life. Now, here's a tiny sciencey bit. There is a neurobiological reason why we do this. When we buy a new pen or a beautiful insert or chase that limited edition cover, our brain releases dopamine in anticipation of the idea of using it. The peak of the high happens at the checkout, not when the pen actually hits the paper. So by the time we get home, or the parcel arrives at our doorstep and we finally unbox it, the newness is there, sure, but it doesn't encourage us to actually use the thing tomorrow or the day after that or the day after that. So this low-buy year is essentially a different form of a dopamine detox. It has the added bonus effect of helping my wallet go on less of a diet. I'm retraining my brain to find satisfaction in the endowment effect, valuing what we already own, and the completion effect, which is something I already get, a massive surge of good feelings that happens when I actually finish a notebook or run an ink bottle dry. Then I rewrote this why in various places that I made sure to keep visible. I stuck it on the corkboard on my door. I listed it on a post-it, which is taped to the front of my everyday carry notebook, and it's even in a small card that rests on my life book weekly that I check every single morning. In addition to the why, I then crafted and wrote out some rules. They're simple but firm, strict and functional. They're based on use cases and not just no's. So number one is refills only. I only buy when a consumable is dwindling, whether that's my ink, my inserts, my refills, not even hobby related stuff. This can extend to shampoo, conditioner, medication, skincare, things that I already use on a daily basis and for sure will wind down as the months go along. I do allow myself to purchase even when the current one is not fully empty, because I understand that logistics and schedule might mean I don't have shampoo at all if I don't buy it in advance. But as much as possible, I try to only purchase when the current item is about to run out in the next week or so. Number two is the backup rule. So I'm allowed a maximum of 1 or 2 backups for essential emergency items like my medicines, and also for high use items like prayer journal inserts or accordion fold sketch inserts. I also have one single exception to this backup rule. The outlier for me is the Baumkuchen grid insert. I have this rather irrational fear that one day Baumkuchen will stop making this collaboration insert with the Traveler's Factory, so I try to keep as many of them on hand. And honestly, because this goes in my prayer journal, I really go through this quite frequently. I actually have 3 backups right now because they're my safe space for writing, but that's the only exception. If it's not a BK insert or a dwindling refill, the answer is no. The next rule is to set up conditionals. Yes, I know that sounds a bit nerdy, but this is just really for items that I allow on my purchase list, which are technically not survival items or business expenses, but they are things that I'm working towards or have been desiring to have for quite some time. I will put conditions on them to make sure that I'm not just spending haphazardly and to further increase the value of the item. So one really good example of this is I've been eyeing the Laban Rosa Lilac fountain pen for a good year now. It really reminds me of a Monet painting, and I love how, as one of the most famous impressionists, he was able to capture different times of day, different seasons, different locations, just by painting the same thing. The most famous are the water lilies, but he also has the haystacks. And the whole concept of that level of mastery, despite not being conventionally perfect like the realists were, it really spoke to me, especially since I have very poor eyesight, just like the impressionists did. So my rule is, with the Laban Rosa Lilac, if I see a real-life Monet painting in person, then I can purchase the fountain pen. It becomes a reward or a memento of that experience and solidifies the whole concept behind my development of my own sense of mastery, instead of just a purchase that makes me happy temporarily. This is a good exercise to do if you don't want to go depriving yourself, but you also want to start setting aside and putting a leash on that little gremlin that says hobbies should have an unlimited budget. So how do I actually implement this beyond making my rules visible and my whys visible? I developed a quick filter. I trained myself last December to start asking these questions anytime I wanted to purchase something that was a bit frivolous. The first is, where will this live? Do I actually have space for this? And given that I have limited space to keep my stuff, it really helps me because the thought of something gathering dust, just bringing it viscerally into my mind, suddenly makes me not want to let go of my hard-earned money just to get something that will take up space and remain unused. Next question would be to match it against one of the whys that I'm saving for. So for example, I am planning for another Japan trip later this year, and I very clearly know the cost of trains, planes, hotels, and meals. Whenever I'm tempted about something that's a bit of a big ticket expense, I ask myself, how much of the trip's budget could this be funding? How many meals? How many train rides would this save you? And just the thought of being able to experience Japan's wonderful views again immediately has me deleting the item from my cart or just closing the tab. Next question would be, do I have something that does the job already? This actually happened to me because I wanted to increase the runs I do this year, especially because my program focused on lifting and cycling. This year, since I want to get into running more, all the running accessories suddenly started jumping out at me on my social media feed. I knocked on my brother's door, and rather obviously now that I think about it, he had a spare hip pack, which was perfect for running. You may have seen it in my video about forest bathing. It's where I stuffed my little on-the-go watercolor insert and painting supplies, and it honestly fits them perfectly. So I'm really glad that I didn't spend money on something that already had a sufficient item to use for it. Sometimes the expenses are valid, so they can withstand all of those questions. The last check that I do in what I'm now calling my spending gate is to ask myself, what emotion am I trying to resolve by buying this thing? Most of the time, my impulsive purchases happen late at night after the end of a long day or after a stressful period, like after my dog passed on. I found myself trying to quote unquote buy happiness back. And sometimes just sitting with the feeling and admitting to yourself that there's something else on your mind that you might not necessarily want to face that will definitely be better resolved by you sitting with the feeling rather than adding to cart and creating even more negative guilt feelings the next day is way more sustainable and personally better for me in the long run. So this last check honestly has saved me from a lot of expenses that passed the first 3 gates. So sometimes I do have a budget for it and I do have a place to store it and I don't have anything right now that's anything like it. But when I get to that last one and ask myself, what am I feeling that I'm trying to address with materials instead of sitting down and facing it, I always end up very resolutely walking away from this impulse buy. So I don't see it mentioned all too often when people talk about low buys, so I thought it might help to share the things that have worked for me. There are also some other tactics that I use when I'm bored or I just need a bit of dopamine. This could look like adding to cart and then exiting the tab, or adding to cart then deleting the shopping app. If the gremlin has to type a URL or go into the app store and download an app, the prefrontal cortex has a chance to wake up and say, hey, we're saving for school, remember? And go into my spending gate questions. Honestly, the goal isn't deprivation, it's intentionality. Every time I finish a traveler's notebook insert or even a sticker sheet or a bottle of ink, I feel such a strong sense of accomplishment that a Happy Mail day could never give me. No hate to Happy Mail days, I love those, but I love them even more when I know that what I've bought is something that's going to serve purpose and be logging memories or accompanying me on trips, and there's no guilt around the purchase at all. So, in a way, I'm not just saving money, but I see it as building discipline for the years I'll need to balance my studies and my day job. Those are my personal reasons and my methodology for preparing for the low buy year. For anyone who's looking to save money, to be less impulsive, or even just be more intentional about the things that they consume, I hope that this was helpful. At the end of the day, I see it as befriending my stationery gremlin. He thrives on the idea that we're one purchase away from being the artist, the student, or the adventurer that we want to be. Doing this low buy and being more intentional about what I'm consuming and using it to drive me towards more action rather than just hoarding, we're actually getting where he wants to be. Sitting by the river in Kitahama in Osaka, watching the light hit the water, I realized I don't need more stuff to belong in these moments. I just need to be present enough to record them. This low buy year is not about depriving myself of beauty. It's about shifting where that beauty comes from. It's choosing a train ticket over a new ink bottle, an afternoon walk over a limited edition pen. It's about the satisfaction of a notebook that's messy, used, and completely full, rather than a shelf full of pristine, empty some days. So here's my challenge to you. Go find that one item in your doombox that you've been saving for a special enough occasion. Take it out, use it today, because the most beautiful thing about your stationery isn't the price tag or the brand. It's the life you're using it to document, and I'm sure whatever you put in it will be absolutely beautiful and absolutely yours. Thank you for spending this time at my desk and for joining me on this transition from paper to paths. I'll see you on the next one.